Hello, my name is John Wester. I'm the Archbishop of the Catholic Archdiocese of Santa Fe in New Mexico. I want to thank you for inviting me to be a small part of your proceedings as Catholic workers from all over the world celebrate the 50th anniversary of the St. Francis Catholic Worker House. I'm just delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting me, and know my prayers for you always and the great work that Catholic workers do throughout the world, and the great inspiration of Dorothy Day. So thank you very much. Early on in my priesthood, back in the mid-70s, late 70s, I started to teach in a Catholic high school. And I asked my pupils one time, everybody knows where they were when John Kennedy was assassinated. Where were you? And one student said, Father Wester, we weren't alive yet. I said, oh. So it's kind of a rude awakening for me, as I was only in my late 20s then. It's a little bit harder to ask people where were they during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, took about 13 days from October 16th to October 28th, 1962. But I do remember very vividly, I was 12 years old, and I remember walking home, and there was a plane overhead, and we were wondering, my friends and I, if it was a Russian plane and if we were going to be bombed by the Russians. And literally 2 blocks away from us toward the ocean were the Nike missile sites, and we heard about them. And I don't think I realized at the time that they had nuclear warheads even. Those Nike missile sites were intended to be a last desperate act of defense if any H-bomb carrying Soviet warplanes got through our initial defenses. Of course, since that crisis, we know that in late 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved with its component republics, and it seemed like nuclear weapons just faded into the midst of time. But then in 2017, I went to Japan, and 2 bishop friends and I went there for a 2-week vacation. And in the course of the vacation, we went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was quite I would say, a very touching and deeply moving experience for me. We visited the Jimbaku Dome in Hiroshima, and the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, and the Hypo Center in Nagasaki, and the Urakami Cathedral, and the Habaku no Maria image of Our Blessed Mother, who was the statue that was destroyed except for her face in the bombing on August 9th at 11:01 a.m., 1945. What was really poignant was when I saw the images of the children running to their school windows when they saw the flash of light. And I just felt deeply for them and the great tragedy that they experienced. I returned home, and I was taking friends into the in Santa Fe to the Los Alamos, of course, is in our Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And I was taking them to the New Mexico History Museum, and they have a big display on the Manhattan Project. And I realized that I was living really with a very false sense of complacency when it comes to nuclear weapons. The Archdiocese of Santa Fe is right at the epicenter of the nuclear age and the Trinity test on July 16, 1945, when Oppenheimer and his team discovered and manufactured and deployed Little Boy and Fat Man. I realized that our local church needs to be at the table of peace to talk about, to advocate for verifiable multilateral nuclear disarmament. As I came to this personal reawakening of the fear that nuclear weapons engenders in me, and it should in all of us, I was alarmed to realize, looking into the situation, that we'd come a long way since 1945. For example, if you look at the just one Trident submarine up in Seattle area, one Ohio-class submarine, as you no doubt know, can unleash up to 192 nuclear warheads with the potential of wiping out civilization as we know it. In fact, the reality is that we are now in a new nuclear arms race that is arguably far more dangerous than the first. We have new cyber and hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, and multiple nuclear adversaries are increasing the grave risks, even as climate change and growing economic inequality accelerate global instability. The old rationale that we need thousands of nuclear weapons for the declared rationale of deterrence is false, when only a few hundred weapons are truly needed for just deterrence. Yet the United States and Russian governments reject minimal deterrence in order to keep nuclear warfighting capabilities, despite their declared rhetoric that a nuclear war can never be won. And so given all this, in January of 2022, we published my pastoral letter, Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a conversation toward nuclear disarmament. The purpose of the letter is to reawaken an awareness of critical importance of ridding the world and of these destructive weapons that began here in my Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and to proclaim loudly that these are an affront to our Creator, who created the beautiful world that we so often abuse and neglect. It is my hope and prayer that this conversation can lead to verifiable multilateral nuclear disarmament. John Kennedy started such a conversation with Nikita Khrushchev, with his so-called peace speech at American University in Washington, D.C. on June 10, 1963. It is at least ironic that he was assassinated in November of that same year. I encourage everyone to read that speech. It's quite powerful. Reagan and Gorbachev started another conversation, and they declared that a nuclear war could never be won and should never be fought. And they signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, on December 8, 1997, which happens to be an important feast in the Catholic Church for our Blessed Mother. And so what conversations can we start? I've been inspired and encouraged by the conversations already started by so many of you. I think of Dr. Ira Helfand, who is a significant part of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and also the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, of course, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and Back from the Brink. I think of Pax Christi USA and Pax Christi International. I think of the Massachusetts Peace Action, MAPA, of the United Nations, of Plowshares, Nuclear Watch New Mexico, and so many other organizations, secular and religious, that work so hard to abolish nuclear weapons and their threat in our world. There have been numerous religious conversations, of course. Pope, in our own Catholic tradition, Pope St. John the 23rd, Pope St. Paul VI, Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and Pope Francis all have spoken strongly against nuclear weapons in one way or another, with Pope Francis declaring that even their possession is immoral in 2019. This was a monumental statement by Pope Francis, to move away from even deterrence and say, no, even their mere possession is immoral. We need to have conversations about that, to talk about that, and the direction that it should lead us in. Here in New Mexico, the New Mexico Conference of Churches has endorsed my pastoral letter. The Mountain Cloud Zen Center in Santa Fe has had many conversations about this, along with other Buddhist centers. Soka Kadai has been a key partner in our Trinity Test prayer commemorations these past 3 years. I've been inspired by the work of San Egidio and their many peace initiatives grounded in prayer and the light of the gospel. I've been encouraged by the Parliament of the World's Religions and their vision for a world of peace, justice, and sustainability. I have been inspired by the Episcopal Bishop and a friend, Bishop William Swing, who is the founder and president emeritus of the United Religions Initiative, and his work and his latest book on nuclear disarmament from a religious perspective. All of these have been very significant, and so many more in these conversations that can lead to nuclear disarmament. On a more local level here, we decided to reach out to the Diocese of Hiroshima and the Archdiocese of Nagasaki in forming a partnership. And it turns out that they were at the same time and completely on their own reaching out to us to do the same thing. And Archbishop Etchen of Seattle has joined us. We have 4 of us now, the 4 Catholic dioceses, Seattle, Santa Fe, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, who formed a partnership called A World Without Nuclear Weapons, a partnership for a world without nuclear weapons. And we're inviting other Catholic entities to join us as we seek to promote this important cause of nuclear disarmament. It's been a great grace to work with my brother bishops in this. Just recently, we had a forum at the University of New Mexico, which was sponsored by the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at USC and the University of New Mexico. We titled it Deterrence or Disarmament. And it was quite an interesting time when we could get together with leaders of the different laboratories, with State Department officials, with religious leaders, in order to discuss this issue and to talk about how we can move this conversation forward toward nuclear disarmament. And so I think what's vital in all this is that all of us do our part to keep this vital conversation moving. We were lulled into a false sense of complacency with the end of the Cold War. We get lulled into that false sense of complacency by narratives that somehow tell us that we have to build up our nuclear arsenals and that somehow these will keep us safe when the opposite is true. I know this isn't easy. Oftentimes we're called naive. But who is it that is really naive? Robert McNamara, whom you remember, who was the defense secretary back in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, said that human civilization survived only by luck. Counting on luck is not a winning strategy. The history of nuclear weapons is replete with near misses, miscalculations, and accidents. With the war in Ukraine, we are now facing the most serious nuclear threats since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Isn't it the height of naivete to think that humanity can survive on into the future as long as nuclear weapons exist? I believe that this cause is truly a pro-life issue. Next August 2025 will mark the 80th anniversary of the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I hope that by that time we can see some real progress and steps taken for nuclear states to support the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. I realize that this is a great step and a very difficult one. As you well know, the nuclear states have not signed the treaty. I join many of you in advocating that they do sign the treaty. I was privileged to be at the UN conference last year at the Second States Party meeting for the TPNW, and I hope to attend again in March of 2025. I hope and pray that all of us can initiate and sustain dynamic and vital conversations that can promote nuclear disarmament. I assure you of my prayers at your gathering now, which is a wonderful way to support this conversation. I believe that all people of goodwill can identify with the words of General Omar Bradley, of all people, a famous World War II general, who had a very important perspective on war and weapons, when he said, quote, "Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living. We have grasped the mystery of the atom and rejected the Sermon on the Mount," end quote. The movie Oppenheimer has reawakened an awareness among many of the threat that nuclear weapons pose to our very existence. It reminded us that the world entered the atomic age here in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. I pray that the conversation begun by my pastoral letter in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe will join the countless other conversations that are calling for nuclear disarmament, including yours. The downwinders of New Mexico and the Hibakusha of Japan give living witness to the importance of this vital conversation. May God, who has begun the good work in us, bring it to fulfillment. God bless you all.